Today's word of the day, carcinization, a form of convergent evolution whereby most crustaceans will inevitably develop into a crab-like shape. It's a pretty cool concept. Essentially, nature has created such an efficient, durable, and well-designed species that it's constantly trying to nudge its various other family members into the same sort of shape. A concept so perfect, it never needed any improvement. Just eventually you'll turn into a crab because it's just that great. Brilliant stuff. The joke that we've seen with this is that it's true for all life forms, and whilst that's pretty funny, unfortunately you need to be quite a simple and basic idiot thing to even be considered to join Team Crab. It's a good thing I'm here then. Yours truly is the only thing dumb and malformed enough to think about what life would be like when I eventually turn into a crab. Plus, I get to think about what type of crab I'd want to be. And do you know, I think I've found just the one. That's correct, the beloved second generation crab has been plucked from the bucket, elevated into the cosmos, and now we have Zenith Diamyo Hermitaur cutting about. Today's episode is going to be covering what exactly was done to Hermitaur to change this, quite frankly a low-level threat, into one of the more vicious and aggressive Zeniths of the bunch. Firstly, the scenery. Aside from the occasional event quest, there is only one singular place for Zenith Hermitaur, and that is the quite frankly beautiful White Lake. It's a simple, barren area, and the zones we'll be throwing down with El Crabo here have no real obvious environmental concerns to affect the fight itself. You should be worried about this. This guy doesn't need any help to stomp you. The upside of this is that you're faced with nice, simple, flat areas, plus the commute to the fight is incredibly short owing to some nice shortcut tunnels. It's basically the complete opposite of the snowy mountains. I love it. Nothing much else to say here about the area, so onto the beast itself. It is enormous, stonefist size for you GU players out there. The shell is from some kind of aberrant monobloss that's the size of a passenger airline, and the horn is gnarled, twisted, and no shorter than 10 million miles long. It is comical how much the features of this meat crab have been dialed up, and the moss on the bone really drives home how much of an aged individual this is. The party in the back is juxtaposed by some serious business up front, with regards to the Zenith part, the claws. These grippers cannot be described by the meager word shield, it's far too small. This is a bulwark of iron, mineral, carapace, and bone. They are magnificent looking weapons, and you're going to get very familiar with them when it comes down to a fight. Firstly, as usual, we'll be looking at dealing with Zenith Water Blight once again. Much like Plesioth and Baru, you'll see an almost complete removal of stamina recovery, unless you decide to bring skills like Rush or a weapon that doesn't really need stamina. Or once again bring 55 water rares, but it really isn't the end of the world if you know what you're doing. In addition, you'll also have to be aware of Zenith Tremor. Whilst it's the only Zenith effect you'll have to contend with, it is very prevalent throughout the fight. So much so that bringing the highest level of Tremor protection is actually going to serve you very well, and will allow you some openings where otherwise you'd be dodging. Enough aesthetic and those ancillary effects, onto the big fight. Typically for players who are at the point of late game double Z, the moves that Zenith Hermitaur shares with the hardcore version of the base species aren't something a lot of people are familiar with, considering the base crab just melts if you even so much as look at it funny. But it is worth going over these changes. Firstly is the water beam. It's got the same tell, but if you're up close and personal with the crab, there will be a second hitbox that will burst from its face and back and hit you multiple times if you go for a guard. I am embarrassingly terrible at countering this. On top of that, this water beam can also be doubled up on. The first beam will be shot out and disappear almost instantly, and the second one will come out and last for the duration. It's worth noting that this second beam can be swept from one side to the other, so you have to pay attention when Diamyo charges this up if he raises any of his legs. Depending on which side the legs raise up on, you have to run opposite to that to counter the beam. As a side note, you can also note the same lovely weakness to sonic bombs when it goes into its guarding stance at G rank 200. Make sure to pack some when you first take this guy on because they're going to be of real usage. A stagger at this point, especially if you're playing multiplayer, is going to result in some big damage. The next move to take note of is one that's been inherited from Frontier's hardcore Diamyo. Instead of a single side swipe with the claws, these go into a new 4-hit combo as the monster sort of strafes around you. For this, both the camera and the Zenith are going to be working against you for this, so you've got to learn the timings without really having to rely on a clear view of the monster. When you see the crab start to sort of zigzag towards you, aim to roll to a specific side of his body, as this will mean that only 2 out of the 4 claw swings will need iframing since it alternates between them, and will give you enough time to get away with standard rolling. As a penultimate move, Hermitaur gets a spin on the big jump attack we've seen from the guy before, with some quite frustrating lingering hitboxes. If you see the monster tense and then leap into the air, try to make sure that you're paying attention to where its shadow is going to land. When Diamyo lands, there's a big old burst of water and it goes sliding around in a circle, dropping water puddles everywhere to catch you after the initial roll. Try to identify where it's going to land, and roll towards the center of this arc as it leaves. The reason being is that you'll end up missing the attack, and afterwards there is always a short taunt, so you're decently rewarded should you make it through unscathed. Finally, there's an uppercut move that Frontier seems to love giving to crab monsters. If you see Hermitaur pull a single claw back and then down, get ready to evade a 2-part juggle attack. The claw goes up, sending you flying up into the air, primed to get spiked back down into the earth with a follow-up slam, so you're always going to have to avoid 2 hits here because you're likely going to be underneath him when the slam comes out. That's a lot to deal with for this crab. He's got a decent mix-up of attacks and is large enough to be really awkward sometimes. But I will say it is nice seeing low-rank monsters get their time to really let loose. Hermitaur, Kezu, Blangonga, all previously thought of as low to mid-tier threats going hard as hell and giving you a run for your money. As I said before, it's great that this previously trivialized crab doesn't even need effects on the surface to test you and send you back to base camp. And that's because you haven't seen what's under the sand. Do enough damage, play well enough, and the crab will leap up and drill itself beneath the dirt, stunning anything nearby with rocks and debris. Then emerges Phase 2. Diamyo is coated in an emerald dust of sorts, and all the previous water geysers emit a grey iron effect instead. Now water is pretty much absent from the fight, and instead the mineral-coated pincers act as flintstones for this highly volatile powder. Claw swipes are now augmented with additional explosions, and a 180 sweep can be instantly comboed into a grab. It's terrifying. You really have to clutch up on your evasions or make sure you're aiming your rolls as far out of these lingering hitboxes as possible. These explosions do not mess around and they will catch you. You do also see another new move here, one where tremor resistance is going to be a very important lifesaver if you didn't think your rolls were up to snuff. What basically happens is you start being chased by the crab, who will slam its claw into the earth a total of 4 times. Each slam has a wide area of tremor, explosion effects, and the Zenith is just that little bit faster than you, so you can't outrun it. With the final delayed slam, the claw will be stuck in the ground, which is great, right? That's an opening. You utter moron. Of course the thing explodes when it pulls the claw back out and wrecks your credit score. What else did you think was going to happen? Explosion mode is just a wonderful bit of excess on top of an already pretty bonkers Zenith, so you've got to be sure of yourself when you see the crab start to dig. It will revert back to the water mode occasionally throughout the fight, but you have to stay on your toes at all costs when it comes to this green explosion mode. It's terrifying, it will kill you, and the explosions stick around for days. This crazy variation, constant aggression, and second phase is going to really take you by surprise. I cannot stress enough how much Diamyo puts this entire Crusty into its moveset. Regardless, with all of that out of the way, we've got to go up the levels and see what else we have to deal with at G rank 400. There is just a small but fairly significant change with this one. During the guarding stance, whilst you can still exploit the usual Sonic Bomb weakness, your window is significantly diminished, as Mr. Krabs will jump over your hunter and turn around. Not only does this landing send out a big Zenith tremor, but it's often followed up by a water beam blasting you right in the back whilst you get your camera corrected, and it's a real pig to avoid. You have to essentially assume that every guarding stance is going to lead to this result, and plan 2 or 3 moves in advance. It's difficult if you aren't aware of the combo, but I mean that's why you're here, isn't it? Luckily that appears to be the only change we have to deal with at 400. Next, in a rare change of pace, we do actually see an adjustment at G rank 600. It's just a single move in the explosion mode, but it can really blindside you. The claws slam down and the dust is discharged in an AoE explosion. Now this explosion can be blocked or evaded, it's fairly quick but fairly simple when you see the starting tail, as the claw slam doesn't really seem to do anything significant. The issue is that there's a hidden trick here. This is actually a vast upgrade to the previous guard stance, as if you hit the crab during the first part of the animation during the claw slam, your sharpness gets completely tanked. Just utterly shot down. We're talking you're going to need 2 full whetstone cycles to get back up to where you were. It's a real powerful counter if you start to overextend your combos, and the loss of sharpness will have you either leaving the area to sharpen, or trying to dodge as many attacks as possible to recover the loss, cutting your damage output in more ways than one. I think it's pretty cheeky, all things considered, and I'm sure there'll be more than a few times where you'll kick yourself by getting outsmarted by this stupid wet bug, but it will happen. Lastly, at G rank 800, where explosion mode gets another lethal move. This one's performed from a guard stance, and it comes out stupidly fast. It's at this point where I'd really recommend that you begin to approach at a diagonal going forward. Just change up your approach to the monster coming in rather than directly towards it, as slightly from the sides, normally towards the front left leg. Not only does approaching at an angle seem to extend the duration of the shield stance, but it means you'll be in prime position to avoid this new dust beam. Diamyo first sweeps it from the center to the right, and then back towards the left, all whilst walking backwards. It's a large cone, and if it catches you, it isn't a single hit, it's multiple tiny little ones, which guarantee a stun at best and turn you into baking powder at worst. You really do not want to get hit by this. This will just stop you in your tracks and send you right back to camp. Luckily, it's a case of setting your position up to be able to respond, and as long as you keep following the guy backwards, you're rewarded with significant downtime to plug away with damage. I gotta be honest, I really love the explosion mode. Repurposing the claws into flints to spark a volatile powder like Teostra, and to blunt weapons at the worst possible time. I really could see this as some sort of rare species in the main game just by itself. Not to mention the beautiful percussive sound effects are just the unstable icing on this crab cake. As a final point, if you plug away and break the claws, really all you're missing out on are the tremors. I wish I was joking, but the jumps, water beams and explosions still go off and are still present in the fight. The only thing that goes away are those tremors on specifically claw slams. So it's a fairly uncommon situation. We're actually not seeing a fight that becomes a cutscene after the break. What I will say though is, just to make things a bit harder, the skull on its back also features its own break reward. Often what will happen is you'll end up having to prioritize damage between the claws or the skull on the back. Unless you're really particular about dealing out your damage, of course, and maybe use a Zenith weapon for the part break bonus. Zenith Hermitaur did not come to play, and despite being a pretty unforgiving crustacean, I like it a lot. It's a pristine design, as with most crabs, and for once we've got a Zenith that was introduced at the start of the update that isn't too much of a pushover. I also really like the fact that it's chosen to adapt to this new green dust. It shows this evolution of the monster that you may not see with some of the other Zeniths, and how it's adapted to a specific environment. Frontier honestly has done more for the Monster Hunter crabs than any other, and I'd love to see the same love in the main games. They really have done this lot a service. Alright fellas, get me in my aquarium, I'm evolving into this guy. See you all in 8 trillion years.